Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellbite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to finally give my review of Bel'Veth. She's been a little tricky for me to get over the weekend, but I was able to get enough games on her that I feel like I have a good idea of where this champion actually lies, so I did want to give my 2 cents on the champion today. Now for those of you who've been following the channel, you probably already know my general opinions about Bel'Veth. Spoiler alert, they haven't changed altogether that much, having actually played her now, but I did want to do this video regardless and kind of talk a little bit more about my thoughts on our newest champion. Now, we'll start with the good here because there's very little of that to actually talk about. Bel'Veth has some small things that I think make her feel okay to play. I like her Q generally. I think it makes her very strong at being able to clear because you get 4 casts, which allows you to keep your passive uptime going, which is kind of nice. The Q also, it's not strictly bound to the arrow directions. You sort of get a 90-degree arc to cast the Q in, and if you have all 4 up, you sort of get to dash in any direction, and then it picks one of the arrows to remove, and at that point you're a little bit more restricted on where you can and can't dash, but in general it feels a lot less restrictive than I was initially anticipating it, and she clears very, very effectively because of that. The QWQ combo that I talked about, just seeing her kit, is definitely a thing, and I think it feels pretty good on Bel'Veth because it's one of the only ways in which she can sort of get into a fight and actually do something. I think her E is an exceptionally powerful ability. I was really surprised by how strong that cooldown actually is. It not only gives you a ton of DR, you gain a ton of healing from it. Even if you haven't built that much lifesteal, like, you can just straight up heal through a ton of damage on it, and it's a decent ability offensively as well, though I think it's a little bit harder to use in that context because you have to stop moving to use it, so an enemy can just walk out of the slap zone and stop taking damage. And as well, it roots you in place, so then you can't even follow them. And there's a little bit of clunk with regards to uncasting it. You have to reactivate the ability as opposed to just issuing a movement command. That felt a little bad, but in general, I was kind of a fan of the E. I think it's a very powerful cooldown that Bel'Veth has, especially since it can instantly stack her lethal tempo and get her off to the races in terms of her attack speed. That is honestly about it with regards to Bel'Veth feeling good. I think the entire rest of her kit is very poorly designed, and I feel like the biggest issue I have is Bel'Veth feels like she is an exceptionally inflexible champion. Bel'Veth can do very, very little on her own. She can't really set herself up for plays. Her dashes are exceptionally low range, so even though she has a bunch of dashes, right, so many dashes, 2 of them are going to go in a direction she doesn't really want to go. After she's used the first one, the second one may not actually take her in a direction she wants to go, even if it gets you slightly closer to the enemy champion, and maybe carrying you too far away than, for you to actually set up for another skill shot. W is obviously fairly avoidable. Her E does nothing for her to get into a fight. All it does is say if you're trying to engage on her or trying to focus her, she's able to press it and do something, and she doesn't have an R button, right? This is a 3-button champion. Bel'Veth does not have an activated ability on her ultimate. Quite frankly, she doesn't, and this means that Bel'Veth just feels like there's not a lot she can do. If she wants to start a fight, well, she can't dash through a wall unless she recently killed an epic monster or a champion, so she doesn't have the ability of really looking for flanks like that. If she's trying to brute force something by dashing twice into range, she can kind of do that, but again, dash is exceptionally low range, and the cooldown and the lockout period on her Q just make it so that that's not really a play she can do. If you engage onto Bel'Veth, she has a little bit better of a time because she can use her E to sponge off the initial damage, stack lethal tempo, then she has a bunch of dashes to kite backwards or go back in and otherwise get her passive resets. That is one thing I do kind of like, is that Bel'Veth doesn't feel bad if she doesn't instantly use her boosted auto attacks after casting an ability, because you can stack like up to 8 of them, which actually is a pretty nice quality of life change. But in general, like, if Bel'Veth is engaged on, she feels like she has some options, but she's so squishy as well that you don't really have much of a choice to do any damage in the fight, right? You can kind of dash in and hit a guy a couple of times, and then you take enough damage that you're forced to dash or flash out, and you're just sort of done with the fight from that point on because you don't have the ability to influence it at all, except maybe throw a W, which is unfortunately too short range for it to be used in a safe manner. Bel'Veth is just going to die if she tries to go back in at low health for a cheeky W, unless she's singing her E cooldown, which sadly is a once per team fight cooldown because it's very powerful, which means that Bel'Veth just doesn't have flexibility of doing anything in almost any scenario. The one place in which Bel'Veth feels okay is when she's able to split push, because she does have a lot of attack speed, she does have that passive on her ultimate that's going to give her the bonus true damage, so she can eventually wreck towers if she's able to sit in a side lane on her own, but even this feels kind of bad because Bel'Veth wants to be farming jungle camps. She can't stack her passive off of lane minions, which means that if she does go to a side lane to split push, she's giving up the possibility of getting herself more stacks, nor can she really be played in a solo lane as a result of this. So in general, this champion does not have any real way of contributing to hardly anything at all. She farms quite well. If you're able to set up a team fight for her, or if you're able to bait the enemy team into engaging on her, maybe there's something you can do at that point, but otherwise Bel'Veth just doesn't have the ability of setting herself up for her own play. Conversely, I want to compare her to a very similar champion, Master Yi, who is another on-hit, auto-attack-based champion with a lot of steroids and very few abilities that feel okay when activated. Master Yi has ways of setting himself up for plays. He can press R and run somebody down. He has Q to close the gap. He has the ability to use his Q to dodge hard-hitting enemy abilities, plus his W as well to outplay if he uses his Q in a more aggressive manner. He has a limited window of time with Wuju style and Highlander, forcing him to use those cooldowns very judiciously, and meaning that if you see him use those cooldowns, you can back away and force them to go on cooldown, and therefore make Master Yi feel a lot weaker. Bel'Veth has none of this in her kit by default. She doesn't have these options for outplaying or otherwise contributing to the team. All she can do is auto-attack. And hilariously, I think one of the biggest issues I have is her attack range. Despite having these big ol' wings that she's slapping people with, her attack range is awful. You have to be directly on top of someone to hit anybody with Bel'Veth, to the point that it just feels frustrating with how big her wingspan is. You're sort of like, oh, okay, so I'm in range, right? No, you are not. You are out of range still, unless you're directly on top of the enemy champion, and it just doesn't feel good at all. The ultimate pop as well, even when you finally get a takedown on a champion, right? You finally get to use your ultimate ability. Your animation for consuming Void Coral doesn't make you untargetable. And the animation where Bel'Veth does her whole Leviathan scream after she takes the Void Coral, that's not skippable, right? That's not just like, I didn't issue any commands, so the champion did a cooler animation than normal. For example, Pantheon, if you throw his spear and then don't issue any commands, you'll see him recall it to his hand, which is like a cool animation. You're never going to see it in a game, right? But like, if you just do that, you get to see this cool animation. Bel'Veth's scream isn't that. It has to happen. That's like an extra lockout window during which she can't take any action. And this means that by the time you get a kill, right, you're low, you manage to lifesteal enough to kill somebody, you pressed R, you were able to get the explosion, you were able to unlock your true form, you get killed right afterwards because you were targetable the whole time you were going through this animation. You heal a little bit when you consume it, which helps mitigate that vulnerability somewhat, but it doesn't do enough for the champion. I just think you still are exceptionally vulnerable. So even though Bel'Veth wants to be this sort of reset-esque takedown fighter like Master Yi, again, to make the comparison, she doesn't have the ability to really do it because of how long it takes her to actually consume the Void Coral. Now, it definitely is taking a little bit longer for me as well to realize I have to activate the ability. I'm too used to right-clicking it, a la Viego. That's a lot more simple and I think elegant of a solution than forcing a champion to press a button that otherwise they literally never have to press. I just am not a fan of that particular design. But either way, the ultimate, even though it gives Bel'Veth a lot of power, it's all but useless in a team fight. It really kind of feels like Bel'Veth needs to take an epic monster or get a kill and then like immediately go to a side lane and try to split push now that she has better stats. That's really the only situation in which it feels okay. The other one is if you're able to take a Baron and you're able to stack up waves. In one game, I was able to stack up like half a lane's worth of minions as I was pushing with Baron in my true form, and by the time an enemy champion showed up to respond to that, there were literally too many minions for them to even remotely consider fighting me, and I didn't have to step up and hit the tower either, right? I just had literally too many minions. That was the one point at which I was like, okay, Bel'Veth is kind of cool. This is a play that only she gets to make and is quite strong. But otherwise, I just think it's too hard for Bel'Veth to get her steroid. I think it's too hard for Bel'Veth to really make any sort of play other than I'm going to go, hit objectives and never hit champions, because that's just not something I could really opt into. There's just too many moments that feel bad about Bel'Veth and too many things that I think make her kit design feel bad. I think the biggest thing for me is Bel'Veth might have felt okay if she had the option of building tanky, right? If this was a champion that you could build, let's say like Gore Drinker, Sterix Gauge, Death Stance, that kind of a build, right? The sort of heavy fighter build, I think Bel'Veth could have felt okay. But the biggest problem is that because of how she works, because of her need to stack up true damage, to have on-hit damage, to compensate for the fact that she has 75% reduced damage on each of her auto attacks, you don't really have the ability to opt into that, because not only do you then not have any utility to compensate with, but you also won't do any damage, so you're just a fat sack of health that walks around and does nothing and can't access its steroid unless you're able to somehow get an assist on somebody. There's just too much about this character that I just don't think feels very good. The biggest problem right now as well is that I don't even think that Riot can buff this character in a meaningful way, right? Because all you're doing is taking a character with very limited avenues for playing or outplaying her and just saying, numerically, you are stronger, right? That is the situation which Bel'Veth feels good, is in the situation where she says, I'm going to auto-attack you, and you're going to auto-attack me, and I have better DPS than you, so I win this automatically, guaranteed 100%, because you can't outplay auto-attacks, right? That's the situation which Bel'Veth feels good. And the problem with that, of course, is that the enemy champion feels like there's nothing they can do about that, right? All of Bel'Veth's damage is auto attacks, and you can't outplay those. And so even if Riot were to buff Bel'Veth, I feel like the situation you run into is Bel'Veth is just a giant stat stick of a champion that kills you if you ever get in her range to auto attack, and therefore you just don't have the ability to do anything about her, right? That's the situation which Bel'Veth is going to feel good to play, and that's a situation in which she's maybe not actually that balanced of a champion, right? There's just too much about this character design that I don't think works well. I really don't think Riot thought through exactly what they were doing. I think they had some interesting ideas, but I really don't think they started from a good point. I think they basically said, what if, wouldn't that be cool if Bel'Veth could exceed the attack speed and just attack as fast as she wanted and could stack infinitely? And they sort of went with it, and they never considered how the champion was going to feel to play. And they've done some things to make her feel slightly better, but I just don't like what they've done with the character. But those are all my opinions, you guys. You'll have to let me know what you think of Bel'Veth down in the comment section below, how you've been building her, how you've been playing her. If there's something that I'm particularly missing, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. If there's something that maybe I'm not doing correctly or don't understand about Bel'Veth. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.